Hail audience, and welcome to episode 109 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Pannobhasa, and there are a few co-hosts walking around on the floor because they're dogs. And I'm starting a little later than usual today because I went out on a journey and a quest to find a twisty looking stick to put into my aquarium, which I found. And so I got the beverage with the little paper umbrella, which signifies that I've got class. And I got the emergency backup beverage, which will probably make an appearance later in this video. And we've got quite a few questions to answer in this video. It's like almost 50, so it could last 3 hours this time. But there are weird people that listen to entire 3 hour long videos, and so who am I to criticize such a thing, especially when they're watching my video? So with that as a kind of dumb preamble, I will commence to answering questions. And the first question is from GameFap. And before I start answering questions, I should just let y'all know that if I didn't see your question somewhere, I do apologize. If you ask a question, I don't answer it. It's mainly, the main reason is just because for some reason I don't see it. So maybe you asked it like on an old video, it wasn't a Q&A video or something like that, or asked it in an unusual place or some such. So anyways, GameFap says, you talk a lot about mental states. Can you give us a scenario or example of someone performing the same action but with different mental states? And I've already done this a number of times. Like the classic example that I have given probably several times by now is you're walking through a forest, you hear a squealing frog, you go and look, and the frog is being eaten by a snake. The snake is trying to swallow this frog, and the frog has got himself puffed up, to inflate himself as big as possible, to make himself as difficult to swallow as possible, and he's squealing to attract some other kind of predator that might go for the snake instead of for the frog. So anyways, you see this snake trying to eat this frog, and so you chase the snake away and you save the frog. But one person does this out of compassion for the frog. They're doing a meritorious deed. The other person does it out of hatred for the snake. They're doing a demeritorious deed. The exact same action, you chase the snake away, save the frog. If you do it out of compassion for the frog, that's good. If you do it out of hatred for the snake, that's bad. Or other examples would be, let's say you're in a Burmese village and somebody comes out and offers food to a monk that walks by. When he's got his bowl, he's going for alms round. So if you're doing it just out of compassion or just joy at offering food to someone you consider to be a holy man, it's like an ordained priest of your religion, like a heavy hitter, according to, in your imagination, your belief, you think this person is a holy man, possibly a saint, a superhuman being, possibly like in Burma, the word for human being is not used for monks. Monks are above human being level, just according to the standard tradition of Buddhist Burma. So you offer the food just because you are happy to support the Sangha. Well, you get one kind of karma. If you're doing it out of desire for merit, it's like mainly, you're like hoping to get some kind of good karma so that you can go to heaven or be reborn as rich and beautiful, whatever. Then that's a different kind of karma. You're doing the same action, but you're getting a different kind of karma. Or maybe you're just offering food because the neighbors are watching. There was a few ladies in the village of Pindalay in central Burma that were like that. I noticed they would only offer food if the neighbors were watching. So in that case, you're Your volition is not nearly as pure, but it's the same action. You just walk out, put food in a monk's bowl. All kinds of things where two people can do outwardly the exact same action, and inwardly it's just like night and day. So let's see. I guess I answered that question, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Outer Haven. And Outer Haven says, how do we distinguish between real wisdom and fantastic fables in Buddhism? For example, I highly doubt the story of when the Buddha was a baby, he went around talking about how great he was and how lotus flowers grow out of the floor as he walked is a factual event that occurred. Well, it's not really that difficult to differentiate fairy tale narratives from real wisdom. Because real wisdom is pretty much abstract. It's not dealing with any particular scenario in ancient India. It's just dealing with the mind, how to purify the mind, how to like increase your mindfulness, increase your concentration, and so forth. So, I mean, it may be that the Buddha is teaching this to a deva or some such, but I mean, who he's teaching it to is largely irrelevant. Whether there's a deva there or not is largely irrelevant. It's just the value of what he's saying. And so if it's applicable to you personally, you know, if it's instructions on how to practice Dhamma correctly, that's one thing. If it's like miracles and fairy tales and talking animals and fire-breathing cobra dragons and so forth, I mean, it's just irrelevant to Dhamma anyway. Genuine Dhamma is with regard to purifying your mind or just cultivating wisdom, getting closer to enlightenment. So, I mean, whether any of the narratives are actually true or not really doesn't matter all that much. This isn't like Christianity where the whole religion stands or falls on the narrative. You know, if Jesus wasn't the only begotten Son of God who died for our sins, etc., then, I mean, Christianity to a lot of people would just collapse. But Buddhism isn't based on a narrative. It's just based on the value of the Buddha's instructions. And so all the stories are largely irrelevant. Sometimes you can be edified by a story. Sometimes the stories are very interesting. Sometimes they're educational with regard to what life was like in ancient India in the Buddhist time. But it's just totally different from the philosophical yogic aspect where you're receiving instructions on how to practice Dhamma correctly. So, I mean, it's not that difficult to distinguish between what Outer Haven calls real wisdom on the one hand and fantastic fables on the other. Fantastic fables should be pretty obvious. Any kind of narrative, you know, about fantastic stuff would be the fantastic fables, and just the instructions on how to practice Dhamma would be the real wisdom. So that should be fairly straightforward. And I also highly doubt the story of when the Buddha was born, he immediately took off walking with a lotus flower appearing under each footstep and just announced, you know, I am the greatest in the world. This is my last life, etc. And then he just sort of reverted back to being a normal baby after that. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from White Ash Piper. And he says, Pacific Northwest or South Carolina, if you had your rathers? Both have their good points and their bad points. With regard to the weather, I just was born and raised into like gray, drizzly, rainy, coolish kind of weather. It suits me. So actually the weather of the Pacific Northwest that a lot of people just hate. I remember one time I was in a grocery store in Bellingham, Washington, long ago. And I was in the produce section, and all of a sudden some guy just starts yelling, "Doesn't the sun ever shine in this state?" And I just wanted to walk up to him. I didn't do this, but I was tempted to just walk up to him and say, "Yes, I have seen the sun shine. It was beautiful. It was like a giant ball of fire up in the sky. My friends don't believe me, but I saw it." And I hope someday my children also will see it. But the main problem with the Pacific Northwest is it is under the sway of loony leftism. And Washington State in particular has been sort of far leftist, probably even before California was. It was like the Wobblies. It was some sort of like quasi-Marxist labor union group was like really their stronghold was in Washington State, whereas South Carolina is firmly red state. And so politically and economically, and with regard to like law and order and so forth, South Carolina is far preferable to the Pacific Northwest in general. You don't have like Antifa doing stuff in South Carolina. Maybe around big universities, maybe around Clemson or something, there might be a little Antifa cell that doesn't really speak up much because they don't want to come across the bearded construction workers with arms bigger around than the Antifa guy's legs. But South Carolina, it does have hot, humid weather, which I don't like so much, especially when I have to work in it. So, but all in all, I'm happy with South Carolina, mainly because it is a firmly red state, and so it's relatively sane. It's more traditionalist. People are polite to each other. People are just genuinely like each other. You got people blessing me like customers. You know, it's like, God bless you. This kind of stuff. It's just a different kind of, it's a different culture, really, a different subculture anyhow, than what's going on in like Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington, especially. So I prefer the weather. I prefer just the massive forests everywhere. Like in Washington State, I think there's at least 3 national parks, wilderness areas, state forests, it's just forest everywhere. At least the western half. We get into the eastern half, it's largely desert. But all in all, just because of the fact that South Carolina is a red state and Washington at present is a blue state makes South Carolina preferable to me. A lot of people who complain about how America is going to shit, you know, how it's just in decline, mainly they're living in Democrat-run areas, either the state or just the city they're in or whatever. And it really is a luxury. I see people complaining about how messed up America is, but here in a place like South Carolina, it's really, you know, it's at least 20 years behind the blue states with regard to everything turning to shit. So, yeah, I'm not planning on moving to the Pacific Northwest. I'm content to stay in South Carolina, although it is hot and humid. That is the main difficulty with South Carolina. Also, you know, you don't have the huge, deep forests here that you would have in the Pacific Northwest. But there's like wild turtles in South Carolina. No wild turtles in Washington State. So there is that too. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Power Treads Supremacy. And it does seem we got some new names asking questions. It's not the usual suspects, unless we got some wise guys who are just changing their names, and I don't know that it's really just the same guy that asks questions. But I think Power Treads Supremacy is possibly a new question asker. A new question asker, and there are a few in this video. So welcome all newcomers to the question asking activities of these videos. So anyway, Power Treads Supremacy says, would you recommend reading Dharma texts via a physical book or e-reader? Well, I don't think it matters at all. Whichever works best for you, whichever you feel more comfortable with. I used to just read paper books, and didn't really like the idea of ebooks very much. I mean, you got to rely on charging batteries and so forth. But lately, almost everything that I read is on a computer now, partly because you can have an entire Pali Tipitaka and like 1,000 other books on one little computer that's, half an inch thick and, this big. You have it all on your phone that's even smaller. And so you can carry around an entire library with you that's just on one little computer or a phone or something. And also, you can read in the dark because the screen lights up. That's a big thing for me. Like if I'm lying in bed, which would be the main time I'm reading a book, then I'm lying in bed with a woman lying next to me. And if I turn on the lights to read, she may not like that very much. She doesn't like light shining in her eyes when she's trying to sleep. But if I just roll over with my back to her and just look at my computer screen, it's fine. So really, it doesn't really matter how you read your Dharma. I mean, you can just listen to somebody reciting it if you want. So whatever works best for you. I don't think there's any metaphysical like advantages or disadvantages between one and the other. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also apparently a newcomer because it's from Ultra Claves Hermetium. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this name. Ultra Claves Hermetium. Ultra Claves Hermetium. And anyways, UCH says, I heard that there's some Kundalini type Abhisek given among the Cambodian Buddhists. Did you find in Burmese Buddhism anything with Abhisek, Pneuma transfer, Kundalini, etc.? In other words, did you find Burmese meditation masters who can transfer their realizations, state, energies, etc., to individual students or groups of people? Are there Kundalini cults among the Burmese as far as you know, either in Buddhism or the Weza alchemy stuff? Well, for starters, I'm not even sure what Abhisek is. I assume it would be short for Abhiseka, which would mean like special practice. Sort of like secret, like arcane, esoteric kind of practices, maybe. Yeah, among the Cambodian Buddhists, that doesn't surprise me very much. Did I find in Burmese Buddhism anything with Abhisek, Pneuma transfer, Kundalini, etc.? No, I did not. There was one rather strange sect in Buddhism, or not a gain, it's just like a tradition, the The Ingu tradition, mainly in northwestern Burma, where you can do like a 1 week retreat there, and they promise you that within 1 week you'll be able to sit for like 4 hours straight without moving, and you will be able to astral travel essentially into heaven realms and hell realms. And personally, I'm guessing that it's based on like self-hypnosis, because it's pretty wild claim, pretty huge claim to say that even a beginner within a week is going to be like traveling to heaven realms and hell realms and sitting like a rock for 4 hours straight and so forth. So sometimes you can get kind of far out claims and a lot of like, hypnotism, like self-hypnosis kind of stuff. And then there's like the alchemy stuff, going for immortality or changing base metals into gold or whatever. Burma is probably the most orthodox Buddhist country in the world. And so there's probably going to be less of this than you're going to find in a place like Cambodia or even Thailand. Less weird esoteric stuff that isn't really supported by the Pali texts, but it has just become like a tradition in an otherwise Theravada Buddhist like monastery or tradition or some such. With regard to, let's see, this question, did you find Burmese meditation masters who can transfer their realizations, state energies, etc., to individual students or groups of people? Yeah, that's really not orthodox Theravada. Most Burmese Buddhists are educated enough, at least the serious ones are educated enough in Theravada to know that that would be wrong view. Even the idea that a teacher can like do some kind of transmission of his state of attainment to somebody else. Because, I mean, everybody's karma is their own. Maybe if somebody is really ripe for it through, it just takes a little nudge for them to have their realization. I mean, that's possible. But for like a meditation master to like beam his state of realization into somebody else, yeah, it's really not considered to be a thing in Theravada Buddhism. So, I mean, it's like in Zen, you've got Zen transmission from teacher to disciple. It doesn't really work that way in Theravada Buddhism. That everybody's karma is their own, that, you just can't get somebody else's realization just gifted to you. That you've got to earn it yourself. You have to be ready for it. You have to be worthy. You have to like cultivated it yourself, or at least in like a past life, so that you're ripe for it now. So yeah, Kundalini, I mean, that's a Hindu thing, as far as I know. Maybe some Tibetan Buddhists or something do Kundalini stuff, but yeah, I don't know if I ever heard the term Kundalini in when I was in Burma. My approximately 24 years in Burma, maybe from like another Western monk, and we're just like talking about Kundalini meditation or something. So yeah, none of this stuff would really be orthodox Theravada. And as I say, the Burmese are as orthodox as they come. So, I mean, I'm not particularly orthodox myself, but I'd have to be really careful. If I was giving a Dhamma talk in Burma to Burmese people, I'd have to be really careful, because if you stray from orthodoxy, then they're going to start thinking this, at best, they think this person is a foreigner. He does not understand Dhamma correctly. We should have, pity or compassion for this person. But if it's a monk doing that kind of stuff, teaching something that's not in agreement with the texts, he might have a few like really gung-ho followers, but the majority is going to say he's a heretic, he's got wrong view. And he might even get in trouble with like the ecclesiastical council in Rangoon. There have been I heard a few stories of monks that were like chastised and rebuked by the ecclesiastical council, which is, the highest, it's like the archbishops of Burma, ordered to stop teaching their method because it's not correct Dhamma, that kind of thing. So it might happen. I mean, there's weird groups of monks in various places in Burma that are teaching weird stuff that probably I've never heard, even 1% of it. So it is possible, but I've never heard of it. And I've been around in Burma, been behind the scenes in monasteries, have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the average Burmese monastery. And none of this kind of stuff was going on there. So I'm going to just move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo has kind of a long intro here, but it's an interesting one, I think. So I'm just going to read it. Romeo says, I work in the mental health field and often counsel people dealing with severe psychosis. Some of their symptoms include hearing dark voices, seeing strange visions, harboring paranoid delusions, tactile sensations, among others. I've seen two basic camps emerge on how to view psychosis. First, there is the growing peer movement made up of people with a lived experience of psychosis and their professional allies. According to them, psychosis is a spiritual gift that we need to affirm and cherish, and that many prominent people throughout history have experienced psychosis, including religious prophets, philosophers, artists, and poets. They feel that mandating someone take antipsychotic medication is wrong and a violation of their human rights. On the other side are the people who advocate the medical model, which says that psychosis should be treated with medication for the benefit of the patient as well as society as a whole, even to the extent that the person is mandated to take the medication. They say that if unchecked, psychotic symptoms can render a person a danger to themselves or others. For example, a homeless person pushing someone off of a subway platform in New York City after hearing voices telling them that the other person is the devil. So, this leads to 3 questions. The first one is, do you see psychosis as a beautiful, possibly spiritual experience that should be affirmed without being mitigated by medication? That's medication with a C, not meditation with a T. After all, the Buddha is said to have had paranormal experiences. Well, I do think that a lot of people who are considered to be highly advanced saints were also a bit nutty. So, I really don't think that psychosis, just as psychosis, is necessarily beautiful or ugly. It depends on what kind of state the person is in. I mean, if the person is harmless, they're not doing anything, they're still able to function somewhat, or they've got people willing to take care of them, then I don't think that there's necessarily any problem. I mean, if they're obviously just dysfunctional so that they can't really function in society, then something has to be done. I mean, you could give them the choice. If it is deemed by medical professionals that they are a danger to themselves or especially to others, then they may have the choice. You take the medication, which will keep it in check, or you're going to have to be committed somewhere. Because letting just really dangerously insane people wandering the streets, which is kind of in fashion now, I guess, yeah, it's not necessarily the best way of going about it, but old-fashioned insane asylums, I mean, those places were like hell realms, some of them. So I think it should be done on a person-by-person basis. I mean, if there's psychosis, if they're like a happy, harmless psychotic, then I don't think that anyone should necessarily mess with them. But if they're obviously very troubled and just dysfunctional and possibly a danger to others, if not themselves, then yeah, I think there should be some kind of intervention just for the protection of society, I guess. So yeah, I think it would be should be judged on an individual basis. So that leads to the second question. Do you think that psychosis should be mitigated as much as possible by the use of medications for the benefit of both the person and society? Well, I've already been kind of touching on this. And again, it's like if they are harmless people, let's say there's a Catholic saint, Saint Teresa of Avila. I mean, she was continually seeing visions and hearing voices and so forth. By modern day standards, she might be psychotic. She was continually seeing these visions, like beings in hell or angels or whatever. And her father confessor was getting a little concerned because she was starting to arouse the interest of the Holy Inquisition. And so her father confessor told her, I mean, you don't know for sure what this stuff is, so just make the sign of the cross every time you see one of these visions. And she was having to make the sign of the cross so many times because she was seeing so many visions. This is according to her own autobiography, which I read, that she just started carrying a cross around with her and would just hold the cross up every time that she'd have this vision. Or like the founder of the Quakers, I can't remember his name, but William James, in his Varieties of Religious Experience, towards the beginning, he's showing that some people who are great saints, great spiritual geniuses, are also a bit on the nutty side. And the founder of Quakerism, he was one of these. He was like a personal secretary to Oliver Cromwell at one point. So he was intelligent, But he was just continually just hearing these voices from God telling him to do all this weird stuff, like take your shoes off. So he'd just he'd hear this voice in his head, or he'd have some sort of deep intuition that he should take his shoes off. He takes his shoes off. He just gives them to some confused farmer standing nearby, and he starts walking barefoot. He gets to the city of Litchfield. He recorded this in his journal, which William James recorded in his book, that God told him that he should walk barefoot through the city of Litchfield, yelling just over and over again, "Woe to the bloody city of Litchfield! Woe to the bloody city of Litchfield!" And God told him to do it, so he did it. And I mean, he was fairly wealthy, successful, intelligent man, but he had this kind of a nutty side. So, I mean, I think that a certain amount of craziness is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, craziness and genius, or like, especially like a really inspired artist. I mean, some of them are pretty darn nutty too. So again, I do think that it should be like each case be judged on an individual basis. That if they're not causing harm to anybody, that, you know, it doesn't seem likely that they're going to cause harm to anybody, just let them be. I mean, if they come for help, then yeah, help them. You know, it's like they can't get rid of the voices in their head, or these like, you know, horrible thoughts, just obsessive in their mind, that kind of a thing. Yeah, maybe they'll just freely choose to do the therapy or take the medication or whatever. So I guess I answered that one. So the third question here: do you have any view on the origins of severe psychosis from a Buddhist perspective, i.e. such symptoms being the result of karma, rebirth, etc.? Well, certainly they'd be the result of karma. That if you're psychotic, let's say, I'm not referring to all of you, but let's say you're psychotic, it's largely due to some disruption in the momentum of your mind. You know, it's like you've got like a split stream, or like unusual turbulence in the momentum of your mental state, something like that. Yeah, I mean, some people are just they're barely human mentally. You know, they might have some of the basic fundamentals enough that they're like in the same world as us. But I mean, they're just looking out over a completely different vista than the average person. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely karma. It's some kind of bad karma, or just some sort of strange karma. You know, it's just sort of karma that is like out on the edges of the bell-shaped curve for humans, that is putting them mentally on the outskirts of the bell-shaped curve. So, yeah, I mean, karma is the momentum of your mental states. And if you've got a momentum of really like dysfunctional or just very strange mental states, then obviously that's karma, because it's the momentum of those mental states that is the karma. And I mean, different cultures have different views. It's like in India, people that have really severe disabilities, physical or mental, are considered to be beloved of the gods because they're really working out serious, heavy karma in this life. So, you know, a lot of people consider crazy people to be like blessed in a certain way. There was a German nun who was staying at the monastery at which I was originally ordained. She had a classic textbook case of schizophrenia. I mean, if you started saying stuff to her that she didn't like, she would just like turn into a statue. Or at first, it's like, why don't you help in the kitchen anymore? It's like, you know, it's like the administrators of the monastery. She originally was there like helping in the kitchen and doing things that monks aren't supposed to do. And she might respond with, some people like cats and other people don't like cats. And they'd say, that's fine, but why aren't you helping in the kitchen anymore? And you just sort of like back her against a wall or something. She would just sort of close her eyes, tilt her head back, get this blissful smile on her face, and just tune everybody out. Just become like a statue. And at one point, she just had some kind of episode where she was convinced that she had attained samadhi concentration because she was more Hindu than Buddhist. She was a follower of Osho before she found this place. I think they finally got her to leave or something at the Rajneesh place. And so she just kind of wound up at the monastery. And it was like she just thought she was fully enlightened. She was insisting that people should bow to her and everything. And man, she was just completely disheveled, just kind of like dancing around, laughing and so forth. And nothing that the board of directors tried could get rid of her. I mean, it was like she was blessed in that respect, in that everything they did to get rid of her, they called the cops on her, tried to have her evicted, everything. It just, none of it worked. So, I mean, it really did seem that she had some sort of karmic or divine interference on her side. She was very difficult to deal with. I mean, she just saw no point in cooperating with anybody. It's like she just didn't see the point of getting along with people. So I'm not exactly sure how I wound up on that digression. That, tangential thought. That's one of the symptoms of schizophrenia, I'm pretty sure. See, do you have any view of the origins of severe psychosis? Oh yeah, it's like, it's not necessarily bad. Some great saints. I mean, you read the biography of Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Mun was seeing all kinds of weird things, hearing all kinds of weird things that maybe other people wouldn't see or hear. And, his followers, people who revere him, think that, well, he was able to see things that were on a different plane or some such. But going with Western psychology, some people would just think that he was a bit on the nutty side. But that does not indicate that he wasn't really a saint or a sage. Because you can be very psychotic and still have like profound wisdom, which is strange. I mean, it's not like ordinary, mainstream human kind of wisdom. But then again, maybe you're better off with some other kind of wisdom than mainstream human kind of wisdom. So again, like my main answer to this whole series of questions here is just each individual should be judged on an individual basis. And if they're not causing harm to anybody, they don't want to take the medication, they don't want to be locked in a room or something, so long as they're not a danger to other people, then God bless them. And it might actually be beneficial to society to some degree just to have, weird people out there. It's like, what was it, the Lakota Indian tribe generally had one person. I can't remember the name of the person. Well, I mean, the position, but they would do the opposite of everybody else. They were just sort of this liminal person who would just throw in this weird liminality into the culture, which apparently the Lakota found useful enough that there'd always be one person appointed. It's like they'd laugh uproariously when the chief would die. They'd fall madly in love with the ugliest, most foul-tempered woman in the tribe, this kind of thing. And it's not all bad. So a certain amount of nuttiness is actually kind of a good thing, I think. I mean, the world would be so boring if everyone was just a normie. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And again, Fred, sometimes he asks questions that you don't really know if he's expecting an answer. He just puts question marks at the end of his sentences, almost at random, it seems. So Fred says, celibacy is not natural? Question mark. And at first I was thinking, well, obviously celibacy is not natural because, I mean, it's nature's way that you reproduce your DNA sequences. It's like propagation of the species or propagation of your genes is natural. So being celibate would in that case be unnatural. But then I'm thinking, well, I mean, some species, and it may be that humans are they're kind of bordering on this kind of strategy where you've got a few males have got harems, and then you've got like bachelor herds, usually of younger males, like sperm whales or elk or certain kinds of birds or whatever. You've got, or even like jungle fowl, the wild chicken. That during the mating season, you've got like the alpha males, they each get like a harem of females. And then most of the younger males that haven't really established themselves in the pecking order, so to speak, they just form like a bachelor herd and just, play video games or whatever. So in that case, celibacy would be natural especially for certain kinds of beta males. If it's a species where you have this strategy of the alphas, like the most successful alphas are getting all the females. So then it's just natural that you're going to have some beta males that are just going to be celibate. So celibacy is probably more natural for beta males than for alpha males or for any females. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Tig. And Tig has like a standard strange question. This question not maybe as irreverent as some of his previous questions. But then again, maybe he's just trolling. I don't know. Anyways, Tig says, the Liezi, a 3rd century BC Taoist text, recounts an encounter between King Mu of Zhao and a mechanical engineer known as Yan Shi. The latter presented his work to the king, and then the next part here is a quote. A quote from the Liezi, I assume. Quote, "The king stared at the figure in astonishment. It walked with rapid strides, moving its head up and down so that anyone would have taken it for a live human being. The artificer touched its chin and it began singing perfectly in tune. He touched its hand and it began posturing, keeping perfect time. As the performance was drawing to an end, the robot winked its eye and made advances to the ladies in attendance, whereupon the king became incensed and would have had Yan Shi executed on the spot, had not the latter, in mortal fear, instantly taking the robot to pieces to let him see what it really was. And indeed, it turned out to be only a construction of leather, wood, adhesive, and lacquer, variously colored white, black, red, and blue. Examining it closely, the king found all the internal organs complete. Liver, gall, heart, lungs, spleen, kidneys, stomach, and intestines, and over these again muscles, bones, and limbs with their joints, skin, teeth, and hair, all of them artificial. The king tried the effect of taking away the heart and found that the mouth could no longer speak. He took away the liver and the eyes would no longer see. He took away the kidneys and the legs lost their power of locomotion. The king was delighted," unquote. So then Tig says, did an ancient Chinese artificer produce a lifelike automaton? And considering just technology in ancient China, I mean, it would be difficult to produce something like this even now with robotics and computers and so forth. How are you going to make something like this out of wood and leather? I mean, it's extremely unlikely. I think either this is just a made-up story, or it's possible what happened was that this Yan Shi was a hypnotist. That I've heard, my father used to tell me this, that some of the fakirs in India who are able to do all these outrageous stunts, like the rope climbing, they throw a rope up in the air, and then the rope just remains vertical, and then, they climb up the rope. And, it's like one person climbs up the rope and then another person climbs up the rope with like a scimitar. And then you see like body parts raining down and then the guy climbs back down again. And my father told me that the way they do this really outrageous magic trick is they just hypnotize the crowd. So the crowd thinks they're seeing this when really they're not. And I would guess that unless this Yan Shi was some kind of wizard who had amazing magical powers, then he would just hypnotize the audience into them thinking that they're seeing this, because I utterly fail to see how you could use any kind of mechanical arts going with ancient Chinese technology and make a lifelike robot that can talk and see and hear and all this with apparently not even any electrical, like, I mean, there's not even a kind of motor in it. You know, it's just wood and leather and this kind of stuff. So I think the two main likelihoods here, that I think what are the two most plausible explanations: one, it just never happened, it's just a made up story; or two, this Yan Shi was a better hypnotist than he was a robot maker. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam. And Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam, says, do you feel that any one of the shorter lists for dependent origination, 2-link, 3-link, or 4-link, could be more accurate than the 12-link dependent origination, or do you feel that the entire thing is contrived and just making a formula out of a non-formulaic original material? Well, I do not think that dependent origination, or dependent co-arising, as I generally call it, which is a more literal translation, I don't think that it started off as being a temporal sequence. That you will find in very early texts, like the Kalaha Viwada Sutta of the Atthakavagga, or the central portion of the Sakapanya Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, where you've got somebody asking the Buddha, what causes this? And then the Buddha answers, and then, he knows what causes A. Well, B causes A. And well, then what causes B? And then he'll say, well, C causes B. And then the questioner will say, well, what causes C? And it just turns into this thing where, it's sort of like this back and forth. And those kind of back and forth question and answers, in my opinion, eventually evolved into this established 12-link system of dependent co-arising. But it's never identified as dependent co-arising in these early texts. And so really, I think dependent co-arising, it wasn't a linear sequence, it's co-arising. If this arises, that arises. If this being, that is. If this ceases, this being, that is, this arising, that arises. This not being, that is not. This ceasing, that ceases. That's like the short version of dependent co-arising. And it's not necessarily referring to a linear sequence of events. It's just referring to duality. That duality has to be like paired opposites. That's how samsara arises. So, yeah, I think the 12-link dependent origination model was concocted by monks that really did not understand dependent co-arising. And if you read the text, you read the early legend, the Buddha almost became a Pacceka Buddha. He almost became a hermit that didn't teach Dhamma because he figured nobody would understand dependent co-arising. And now, Burmese monks, they just learn the 12 links and they think they understand it. But I think the Buddha was much more likely to be correct than these Burmese monks that just memorize something and think they understand Paticca Samuppada. The Buddha thought, almost nobody understands it. And I think, or almost nobody would understand it. And of the few people who have tried to explain dependent co-arising, I think one of the Buddhist philosophers who did the best job was Nagarjuna. And he was not a Theravada Buddhist. He wasn't necessarily a Mahayana Buddhist. I mean, that's kind of controversial. Like his main book, the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, it's based entirely on the older Buddhist text. It has no Mahayana text quoted in it, no Mahayana jargon, no mention of bodhisattvas and so forth. But Nagarjuna just considered dependent co-arising to be the same as voidness. Because the main point of dependent co-arising, it's conditional. If this arises, then that arises. And so this and that depend on each other. They have to co-arise in order to create a dualistic universe. And so they're just conditionally real. They don't have a self essence. They don't have an inherently real self essence. And that's, so you could say that voidness, dependent co-arising, and anatta, or no self, are all the same. And it doesn't necessarily involve any kind of long chain of causes and effects. I mean, what causes the causes? You know, you get to just the general principle of what causes the causes, not, you know, A causes B, which causes C, which causes D. It's just, you know, what causes all of that? It's just this dualism. It's the way perception works. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Liberlam's next question. Is Nibbana a ceaseless equanimity in the jhana sense? No, I would say that Nibbana is not a ceaseless equanimity in the jhana sense. Nibbana is completely off the scale. So ceaseless equanimity is irrelevant to Nibbana. Jhana is irrelevant to Nibbana. If you get into a jhanic state, then you get sort of like a glimmer of what Nibbana might be like. In the text, sometimes it's called, jhana is called temporary liberation. It's like if, I mean, I've given this analogy before, or this simile, and I think if you don't get it already, it may be that you're just not going to get it. But let's just say that like waves are like mental states and water is like consciousness. So consciousness is like the essence of mental states. If you don't have any consciousness, you can't have any mental states, just like if you don't have any water, you can't have waves. But most people are just caught up, they're lost in the waves, just identifying the waves. I like this wave, I hate that wave, this wave is bigger than that wave is nicer than this wave. You know, it's just, they're just locked into waves, and they're oblivious to water. Even a fish swimming through water just doesn't ever notice that it's wet. So if you get into a jhanic state where you eliminate the mental states as much as it is possible to do, it's like you have a flat calm, then it's much easier to be aware of the water because there's fewer waves to be distracted. But once you become enlightened, there could be the raging of a stormy sea, and if you're really enlightened, you're still seeing it as water. You're still at the foundational, you know, essential level of water, and not just being lost in the waves. So you can use jhana as a way of like eliminating this distraction so that you can see through the veil and see reality, which is the level of essence, let's say. And then once you've got that, then, I mean, it's raging of the stormy sea is just water. You know, it's like there's a Zen saying that Zen in the marketplace is 1,000 times better, maybe 10,000 times better than Zen on the cushion. Because if you still have got like the enlightened mind, when you're out in the marketplace where people making noise and just all kinds of stuff going on, then you've really got it. If you lose it when you get up off the seat and you walk out of the zendo and commotion starts happening and you just get lost in samsara again, then you haven't fully mastered it yet. So I hope I answered that question. I think I did, to some degree anyway. And so I'm just going to move on to the third question from Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Liberlam. And he says, do you feel that half lotus is more stable than full lotus for long-term meditation? I'm not sure exactly what he means by long-term meditation. More than an hour? More than 3 hours? Or does he mean like, you know, regularly over a period of years or something? I'm not exactly sure what he means by long-term meditation. But I do know that if you're able to assume the full lotus, it is the best position for most people to meditate. That, I mean, it will improve your meditation by at least 3% just because you're in the full lotus. It's some kind of stability thing. And also, if you're in the full lotus, it's easier to keep your back straight. So it's easier to remain alert when your back is straight. You're like in an alert, ramrod, straight vertical position. It's easier to remain alert that way. And I'm sure the Hindus, like the yoga people, will have some kind of explanation involving the kundalini or the chakras or some such. But it may also be that when you're sitting in the full lotus with your legs like this, that it's like reducing blood flow to your legs, which might increase blood flow to the upper body, including the brain, which may help you to be more alert or something. But yeah, I mean, the full lotus, to the extent that you're able to sit that way, that it is preferable to the half lotus. Although it may be that you just can't sit in a full lotus for more than an hour without agony, and then that becomes distracting. It may be that you'll have better meditation in a half lotus if you're going to sit for like long periods of time. If like the agony of a full lotus, your legs just aren't flexible enough to really get used to the full lotus, so that you can't just flop into position. Yeah, then you may have to go back to the half lotus, which, like in the short term at least, isn't as good as the full lotus. The full lotus really is an excellent position for sitting in meditation. And I've just never been able to sympathize with people who meditate sitting in a chair. So at least the half lotus, it's it's better than a quarter lotus. And a quarter lotus is better than the so-called easy position, sometimes called the Burmese position, where you just have your feet like flat on the floor, one in front of the other like this. They're not actually crossed, but they're like just one in front of the other like that. And that's the way most Burmese monks sit, is in the so-called easy position. So I hope I answered that question. No, I just saw a fish. My woman has finally got a fish in her aquarium, and it moved suddenly in my peripheral vision. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Dhamma River. And Dhamma River says, have you ever read Thoreau's Walden? What's your opinion of it? More specifically, he seemed to have a spiritual pursuit of truth without any religious influence. He was similar to the Buddha in the sense that they both studied nature deeply. Well, I haven't read Thoreau's Walden. I've read like excerpts. I really never read much Thoreau, and so I can't really give my opinion on it. I mean, Thoreau, he lived in like a little shack, a little cabin by a Walden pond. And he strikes me more like a Lauren Isley type, if you know who Lauren Isley is. He was just sort of a lover of nature who just had like gazing upon nature, just being at one with it to some degree would cause him like insights, and he would have these interesting things to say, inspired by nature. I think Thoreau was kind of like that. But then again, I really don't know that much about him. About the only thing I really know about Thoreau, aside from what I've just told you, is he had a saying that has stuck with me for many years, that it seems to be a law that one cannot have a deep appreciation for both man and nature. That you're either a people person or a nature person. Is very rare that a person is both. And yeah, that seems pretty obvious to me. I was more of a nature person than a people person. And like in Burma, it's like everyone's a people person. Nature is just kind of scary. They don't like it. If I was a monk looking for a good forest, I mean, I'm looking for like a primeval forest. And to the Burmese point of view, a good forest is one that doesn't have any scary animals. They've all been killed off or chased away. You've got lots of people, especially woodcutters, walking around, lots of trails and everything. And they just didn't get it. Maybe the Japanese have somewhat more of an appreciation of nature, but it's like an aesthetic. They like the manicured parks and that kind of a thing. So anyways, getting back to Thoreau here. I'm not sure how similar he was to the Buddha, but then again, I haven't read his book. but he does seem to have been largely a materialist, who, at least to the extent that he considered nature to be real, not something necessarily to be escaped from or something to transcend. I could be wrong because I really don't know that much about him, but I really don't think that he was in the same ballpark as Gautama Buddha. So considering that I don't know much about Thoreau, I'm just going to move on to Dhamma River's next question, which is, do you consider yourself to be currently following the Dhamma without your former religious affiliation that came with ordination? I'm just wondering if there's a connection between his path and your current path. Oh, he's comparing me to Thoreau, I think. I'm not following Orthodox Dhamma anymore, because I'm not a monk. I don't have the rules. I'm not sitting in, don't have like a regular meditation regimen anymore. So I'm just kind of doing more of a layman's kind of Dhamma, which is, watching your own mental states as a general rule. It doesn't always work, but, trying to be mindful, doing a little bit of oming when I'm working, that sort of thing. So I'm certainly not following the Dhamma to the same extent or in the same way that I was when I was a monk. But I mean, everybody, if they're making any kind of progress, they're following Dhamma to some degree. If you're just, staying out of trouble, you're just staying away from, not telling lies or something, just trying to be a straight person, person of your word, or just you're like more careful, more mindful in your actions than the average person. And I mean, you're practicing Dhamma possibly without realizing it at all. So it's kind of difficult to say to what extent somebody is following Dhamma. Unless you're talking about just like the orthodox version of Dhamma as it is laid out in the text, in which case, yeah, I'm not doing that very much anymore, other than just, some of the like mindfulness practices or something. But even then, it's not really a systematic practice. It's just, in a way, what I've learned as a monk is now being put into practice or applied to samsara in a more, at a higher difficulty setting. So, yeah, it's kind of a strangely difficult question to answer. So it's like I kind of struck out with Dhamma River because I never read Thoreau, and the second question of his is it's just kind of an elusive kind of question. To what extent I'm following Dhamma? I mean, to some degree I am. To some degree, anybody who's not just flat out like corrupt and evil is going to be practicing some Dhamma in many cases without having any idea that they're practicing Dhamma. So, with all due apologies to Dhamma River, I'm going to move on to the next question. And this is from Not a Canadian French ATM. So, it's an automatic teller machine. Let's just call him Not a Canadian. So, Not a Canadian, and he changes his name every few weeks. So, he's asked questions before under a different name. Not a Canadian says, what is the best dish that your sweetheart makes that do not include meat? Well, there's different ways of answering this. Well, it depends on how you look at it. But, I mean, like one of my favorite things is that she makes for me is just like pasta with pesto. That's it. You maybe throw a little bit of Parmesan cheese or something on it. But, yeah, that's vegetarian, I guess. If you include fish, then like pasta Alfredo with salmon in it, she makes that really well. But there's not much skill in cooking involved. You just know how to boil pasta, essentially. She doesn't make the sauce from scratch. So, I mean, something she makes from scratch that's a really good dish. She does make a kind of lasagna that's made with zucchini instead of pasta because she doesn't like carbohydrates as much as I do. So that's really good. She makes a good zucchini lasagna. I mean, she's really a good cook, although most of what she cooks has meat in it. She likes meat. So I'll just move on to Not a Canadian's next question, which is it somewhere mentioned who became the successor of the Sakyan kingdom when Buddha became the Buddha and his son also a monk? It's kind of strange that I really don't know who supposedly, according to legend, was the successor of King Suddhodana, who was the Buddha's father. According to the legend, the Buddha was a royal prince, and King Suddhodana was the king of Kapilavatthu, the city-state, the polis of Kapilavatthu. I assume that you're going to have some chronicle like the one of the like the Mahavamsa or something that mainly is dealing with Sri Lanka, but there's got to be some kind of chronicle that deals with this. I don't think it says it anywhere in the Pali text. I could be mistaken. But the Sakyan kingdom didn't last very long after the time of the Buddha. It was shortly after the Buddha's death. I think it might have even been King Ajatasattu, or it was like maybe the son of King Ajatasattu, who was alive in the Buddha's time, who just essentially genocided the Sakyans. That the Kapilavatthu just got genocided. And it was like some king wanted to marry a Sakyan princess, and they sent him like a slave girl instead, disguised as the Sakyan princess. And when he found out that he didn't get the princess, but he wound up marrying this slave girl, that he just got pissed off and just sent his army to just wipe Kapilavatthu off the map. And that happened like just not very long after the time of the Buddha, within a few decades. So it may all just mean that nobody really knows what happened because it was, we're getting just at the very dawn of history that far back in India. So, yeah, I mean, you could look it up. I assume you could find it online somewhere, who was the king of, I mean, it's all based on legend though, because I mean, the historians, the Indologists, the experts generally say that the Buddha couldn't really have been a crown prince. His father wasn't really a king because Kapilavatthu was a kind of aristocratic oligarchy. It had like a council of elders kind of running the place. And so people will try to like compromise and say, well, the Buddha's dad was like the senior member of the council of elders, but it really was sort of a republic rather than a kingdom, according to the experts. And so there were probably, some other member of the council took up the executive position or whatever during the few decades at most that Kapilavatthu continued to exist as a city-state before it got genocided. But I assume that just tradition will have to have some kind of answer for that. It seems like a pretty obvious question. And it is kind of strange that I never heard about, or at least I don't recall hearing, who was the successor of King Suddhodana. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Skuladin or Skuladin. And his question is, what is a tulpa? And I think there was a question about a tulpa in a previous Q&A recently. I didn't know what a tulpa was. It was just some Tibetan term, I'm pretty sure. Anyways, Skuladin usually has like bullet points after his questions. And so he's got this one that says, I'm not sure, I'm not a biologist, though I think technically Tyler Durden might count as one. Also Styx's bed sheets, if you're familiar with that story. And Tyler Durden I'm familiar with because he's in the movie Fight Club, also the novel Fight Club. But Styx Hexenhammer's bed sheets, I never heard the story, so I'm not sure what Skuladin or Skuladin is referring to here. But I did look up Tulpa in online to find out what the hell is a tulpa. And it says, in Tibetan Buddhism and later traditions of mysticism and the paranormal, a tulpa is a materialized being or thought form, typically in human form, that is created through spiritual practice and intense concentration. So it would be sort of a manifested being that's just mind-made. In that case, I don't think Tyler Durden would be a tulpa, because Tyler Durden was just a hallucination combined with a split personality of the protagonist of the movie and the book. So, I mean, when other people were looking at Tyler Durden, they were just looking at the main character, the protagonist. It was in his own mind that he's hallucinating this other person that isn't him, but everyone else, they just considered him to be Tyler Durden. So, including Marla, his girlfriend, she just called him Tyler. So, yeah, a tulpa, it could be like an egregore. That an egregore, and maybe an egregore is slightly different. Egregores are spoken of in paganism, where it's the belief of all these people in this being actually causes that being to exist. So like the devil, Lord of the Flies, the monster in the book Lord of the Flies, forget the movies, in the novel Lord of the Flies, that the monster who was Satan, the devil, was a kind of egregore. That he didn't really exist in an outward objective form, but it was like he had like this symbiotic relationship with this dark corner of every person's mind, and that made him real. So a tulpa, though, would actually have some kind of physical body, apparently, or at least would appear to have a physical body. And so, I mean, it's one of the psychic powers that a meditator can get, according to traditional Buddhism, is the ability to multiply their body many-fold. And it may be that only one is the real body and the rest are just these projections that appear real and might even like feel real. So it might be something along those lines. But there's really not a lot of emphasis on tulpas in Theravada Buddhism. But I guess a tulpa is just a materialized being. A materialized, like somebody imagining with such intensity and concentration some being that the being just materializes. And maybe magicians in past times have done such things. Maybe, I don't know, it could be people with psychic powers can do these things. Neem Karoli Baba up there, he may have been able to do that sort of thing. I mean, he is considered to have been in more than one place at the same time, occasionally. So, yeah, I guess that's what a tulpa is. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Skuladin. And I have to point out here that Skuladin asked 4 questions. I think he forgot that he asked the first one about tulpas, or maybe it was just a joke question, in which case I shouldn't have gone to the trouble of answering it. But he had this another comment that had 3 questions in it, which is, the first one is with regard to, I don't know how to pronounce this word, hirayeth, which is a longing for a home, a place, or a feeling that no longer exists or ever existed. And then there's like the bullet point saying, why is hirayeth so prevalent? Oh, I guess that's the main question. Why is hirayeth so prevalent? And then the bullet point actually is, I don't know if it's just a transition from a life of experiences to a life of conveniences, or if there's something else. I highly doubt that the past few generations just had a large concentration of old souls. Well, hirayeth, a longing for a home, a place, or a feeling that no longer exists or never existed. I mean, that's just common to the human race, I think. You know, it's like, even in ancient times, people were wishing for the good old days to come back again, the golden age, instead of this dark age, this iron age that we're living in. So I think it's just dissatisfaction with the way things are, and people wanting something that's, they think anyway, would be more satisfactory, looking to the ancient past or looking to some future utopia. I mean, unfortunately, nowadays, it's largely a Marxist utopia people are looking forward to. Feminized Marxism, castrated Marxism. That's going to be, that's the thing that they're craving, or, you know, that's they're longing for that. So that's just human nature. This harayat, or a longing for a home, a place, or a feeling that no longer exists or never existed. It's just dissatisfaction with the way things are and craving for something that you think will be better. Maybe looking towards the past like a conservative type, maybe looking towards the future like a progressive type, maybe just, you know, looking sideways or something. You're just looking for a different culture, different country to move to, different religion to follow, whatever it is. And it's largely based on this illusion that you're unhappy because of where you are rather than because of your attitude. And you're going to take your attitude with you. Maybe if you change religions, that might have a change your attitude enough that you become happier. Or just changing your environment. If you're in a really bad environment, it's really a drag, just changing your environment may cause you to be happier. But as a general rule, you're taking your attitude with you no matter where you go. No matter where you go, there you are. As Buckaroo Banzai once said. So, yeah, that's just common human nature, I think. And I'm going to move on to Skuladin's next question here, which is, would you kindly recommend a book for meta cultivation? And then he's got the bullet point: readers face a paradox whenever they feel emotional involvement for fictional characters. Still, a novel's portrayal of love can convey an accurate representation to the nature of this emotion, even if the specific details of characters and events are completely imaginary. Okay. So would I kindly recommend a book for meta cultivation? I mean, I'm really not meta-centric. I've never really put a lot of emphasis on meta cultivation. I never liked meta meditation just because it seems like it's fake. You know, it's, for me, you don't just turn on meta like a faucet. That it has to be spontaneous. You know, it has to be like some kind of genuine spontaneous thing that just comes out of you, not something that you deliberately beam at different beings. So, I mean, he's referring to novels in the bullet point, but I mean, Miracle of Love, stories about Neem Karoli Baba. It's one of my favorite books. He had a lot of meta. Or another strange idea that came up is, just while reading this, is Dostoevsky's The Idiot. That Prince Mishkin, the idiot in the story, he was Christ-like, essentially. That's what Dostoevsky was trying to do, is trying to portray a Christ-like person, just a genuinely good person. And at a higher level, he does symbolize Christ. You know, it's like he and Rogozhin both competing for the same woman, Nastasia. You know, it's sort of like Christ and the devil competing for the soul of the sinner. But Prince Mishkin, I mean, people get pissed off. I mean, I remember talking to a woman who was she'd get pissed off reading The Idiot, because Prince Mishkin, and somebody can literally try to kill him, and then the very next day he's forgiven them and he's inviting them into his house. And so he just forgives everybody. He just lets people walk all over him to some degree. People might ridicule him behind his back, especially men. But I mean, in his presence, they really cannot dislike the guy. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it might help to read Dostoevsky's The Idiot, but I'm really not an expert on meta cultivation. Meta is one of my weakest paramis. I've just gradually mellowed as I get older, so that I do have more compassion and sympathy for the human race. I have more use for the human race than I used to. I have less disdain for humanity, but still, I'm just not a heart-oriented kind of a person. I'm not just gushing with metta. And so I may not be able to recommend a really good book for that sort of thing. And so I'm just going to move on to Skeladin's transgressive fourth question, which is, would you kindly explain the ethics of life creation? And then his bullet point says, like if someone cloned themselves only to keep their clone in a holding tank for 40 years, just in case they needed a new cornea or spleen, or if trilobites were brought back from extinction only for them to wreak havoc by invading cities, knocking over buildings, and chasing scantily clad women around, God's willing. Yeah, I don't think the trilobites are going to come back and destroy cities. I mean, most of them weren't very big and they were aquatic. And they just got out competed by more what's the word? More derived life forms, more evolved life forms. But kindly explain the ethics of life creation. Well, I mean, whenever anybody has a baby, whenever anybody reproduces, that is the main kind of life creation. Aside from just your body, like, producing new cells and so forth. But yeah, the ethics of life creation, I don't think that cloning somebody would necessarily be all that radically different from just having a baby, having a kid. I mean, if you have a kid just to put them in a holding tank and use them for spare organs, that wouldn't be so good. I mean, the clone, yeah, I mean, if you had a clone and had them in a holding tank, it would largely depend on whether they were conscious or not. You know, if they're just going insane and floating in this tank of liquid, you know, nothing to do, just total sensory deprivation, so that they're just insane or something, then yeah, that would be worse than if they were just like completely unconscious. It's just like this body. So yeah, I really don't think that it would be ethically necessarily all that different from just reproducing, unless you've got like experimental, like genetically manipulated stuff, like a lot of science fiction. You've got like scientists that are trying to produce a certain kind of organism, and they have all these failed attempts, like the fly kind of a thing. In fact, I think it was one of the bad sequels to The Fly, with, what was his name, Jeff Goldstein, Gold something. You know, it was like the 1980s version of The Fly with special, you know, they had like special effects back then at that time. So yeah, I mean, it would be sort of like the glory days of experimental brain surgery, like back in the 1970s, where let's cut this out and see what happens. So in a case like that, I mean, you're playing God, and I mean, it would be much more risky karmically, just creating something that could just go like horribly wrong, than just having something that, you know, I mean, you've got a really good likelihood that it's just going to be a normal, healthy human being, you know, like having a baby. So the ethics of life creation, there's going to be some mention of this later on. I remember seeing a similar question. It might be coming up really soon about like the Buddhist attitude towards just reproduction, having children. Because to exist is to suffer, in a way, by having children, by creating any kind of living organism that is conscious, that is sentient. In a way, you're like damning them to a life of unhappiness. Of course, it's their own karma, though. That if you don't have this kid, somebody else is going to have them. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be similar to that, I think. I really don't think that the ethics of life creation, like through artificial means, would be all that different from the ethics of life creation through natural means, which is, you know, reproducing. So it'd be like on an individual basis again, I think. Sort of like the psychotics that I mentioned earlier. That's not a very thorough question, but he asked for, and so he's just going to have to deal with that. And I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from Jeffrey. And Jeffrey says, do photographs prove the concept of time by affirming the past? Not necessarily. I mean, you can dream that you're looking at a picture like in your sleep that really is not referring to any actual past event necessarily. So I don't think that photographs prove the concept of time. I mean, anything outside of you doesn't prove anything really. I mean, a lot of the early Western philosophers like Spinoza and David Hume especially, they really pounded away at this. That, I mean, you might be able to be absolutely sure of something that's completely self-contained within your own consciousness, but when you're dealing with something out there in that world, the phenomenal world, nothing is absolutely certain. You cannot have 100% certainty. You cannot have 100% proof of anything really. So, let's see. This question is very similar to the next question. And so I might as well just move on to the next question, and then try to answer both of these questions, because this next question is kind of getting into it a little deeper. This is from Austin. And Austin says, yeah, we are recording. After almost an hour and a half, I verified that we are actually recording here. Okay, Austin says, how do immaterialists solve for continuity existing without minds present to perceive, for example, if I light a candle and walk out of the room, hours later when I return, the candle has burnt to the bottom and the wax has melted. If physical objects, he's got psychical objects, I think he means physical objects. If physical objects only exist in the mind's perception, and there was no mind to experience this, how did it happen? Well, I mean, the inventor of immaterialism, which he called immaterialism in the West, is George Berkeley. And George Berkeley's answer is that, even if the room is empty and there's a candle burning in there, God knows. God is always watching. And you could use this for, with regard to like a Buddhist, like a Mahayana Buddhist, the main philosophies of Mahayana Buddhism, at least Yogacara and Madhyamaka, neither one of them accepts physical matter as real. So they might say that, I mean, they'd have like a smaller version of Berkeley's immaterialism, where it's not God Almighty that's looking at that, but there's always all these beings, that we can't see, that, they're like devas and so forth, that have this view of stuff that really helps to like nail things down and keep things regular, keep law and order with regard to like standard laws of nature and so forth. There is that. But I've thought about this a lot too. And it's just, in a way, it's like the rules that work for this version of reality, that has to be built into it regardless of whether there's physical matter or not. And that might not be a very good answer. Let's see. Because I'm trying to recall how I was dealing with this when I'm thinking about this as a monk sitting in a cave somewhere. Because I used to think about this sitting in caves. It's like, how can you not consider that to be proof? In this case, Austin's case, it's the candle that burnt down. In Jeffrey's case, it was a picture of something that was taken in the past, although it's slightly a different question, because I guess Austin is asking, how can you say that physical matter isn't real when you can light a candle, leave the room, come back, and the candle is burned out, it's burned all the way down. It's essentially what you would expect. So, I mean, to that extent, it's like your belief in reality makes that kind of stuff happen. Yeah, but I mean, it's not proof. Nothing can be proven outside of your own mind. Like the Yogacara Buddhists, which is like the most evolved, or it's more evolved than Madhyamaka, I think. That Madhyamaka came first, and then Yogacara was an attempt to like build on to Madhyamaka. And I don't think that they really they really were an improvement. But they think that it's sort of like Mary Baker Eddy says, if there is no physical matter, and it's all our karma, it's all self-contained. And so we see what we think we ought to see. And there's different levels of consciousness beyond just the thinking ego. That was something I was trying to talk about in the previous Q&A, that all this stuff like karma and so forth, it's not at the level of the conscious thinking ego. That there's different levels of consciousness that are aware of all sorts of things. Like there's a deeper level of consciousness where we have like some sort of empathy, some sort of like psychic connection with other beings. And anyone who's got some sensitivity has felt that at some times. That you feel that there is a certain sympathy or empathy or even telepathy going on. It not necessarily at like the level of the ego, but it's like at this deeper level. And this kind of stuff is like in the realm of that deeper level, or a deeper level anyway. And I'm sorry that I can't really just prove that matter doesn't exist. I think it was Immanuel Kant who said it was the scandal of philosophy that nobody has been able to really prove that physical matter exists or doesn't exist. Because it's out there and you can't really prove anything. So, yeah, it's just kind of frustrating. You cannot prove that physical matter exists. You can't prove that it doesn't exist. But ultimately, it is irrelevant whether it exists or not, because everything comes out the same either way. I mean, miracles, magic, that sort of thing might be more likely or more possible if physical matter is an illusion. And I think the materialists really have a difficult time dealing with any kind of like parapsychology, any kind of paranormal stuff. They just flat out say it's bullshit as a general rule. So anyways, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the Arya Sawasti Project. And the Arya Sawasti Project says, since the topic comes up frequently regarding karma, action, and mental states, example, a psycho is feeling pleasure and happiness or nothing at all, hacking his or her victim to pieces. On the other hand, someone is forced to engage in a wholesome act like court-ordered highway cleanup, charity, but is not happy about it. Are mental states equal to emotions? It seems that mental states are more than just an emotional state. Can you elaborate, define, and discuss said mental states? So again, this is talking about different levels of consciousness. So the psycho who is feeling pleasure at torturing somebody and then murdering them, I mean, you can't really call them a happy person. Like at the surface level, they're feeling some kind of rush. It reminds me of the movie Clockwork Orange. You got the Droogs, these teenage gang members who are going out raping and murdering and torturing, just doing ultra violence, and they're just laughing uproariously the whole time they're doing it. And in a way, they're laughing is just sort of like, I mean, it's almost like hooting what they're doing. And in a way, it's just trying to like drown out their conscience, what little conscience they've got. They're just sort of like just pushing forwards with this rush and just ignoring the little, ignoring the more subtle stuff that's going on. And a psycho, I mean, they may be dissociated from the deeper parts, like any kind of compassion. Like a sociopath supposedly has no conscience, no compassion, but still those levels are there. They're just like dissociated from it. They're like their thinking ego is blocked off from other levels of their mind that are still there. It's just that they have, they're oblivious to it. And the average person really doesn't have a really strong link to some of these deeper levels anyway. So there are different levels of consciousness. that are all like functioning, and for the most part, we're only aware of the thinking conscious superficial ego, and like the dream symbolism, and just deeper levels of like Jungian archetypes and stuff. We can like hypothesize, theorize about them, but we don't really have direct like awareness of them, because we are falsely identified with our thinking ego that is just a different part of mind. It's just like one stratum that is like self-referential, but these other parts and just the minds of others are like outside of this self-referential ego, and so for the most part we're oblivious. So let's see here. And people who do good and don't like doing good. Yeah, there's that kind of stuff too. The kid who has to help his mother by washing the dishes or something, and he hates it, but he's still like kind of overcoming his dislike for doing it. So there is a certain amount of like self-discipline and like self-restraint involved when you're doing something you don't want to do, you don't like to do it, but it's a good thing to do. So there's just different levels of mind. It's not all at the surface. It's not just the surface mental state that is the main mental state or the most important mental state. There's also this other stuff going on at different levels. And if you try to just be aware of those other levels, it's not going to work, because the part of you that's trying to be aware of those other levels is just this one level that's just the superficial ego. So, yeah, mental states are more than just an emotional state, or rather mental states are more than just the mental states of the superficial thinking ego. So I guess I answered that question, sort of, kind of. And I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is from Robert. And Robert says, would you say alcohol is more harmful than weed for the mind and mental clarity? I know karma is based on intention, but assuming similar intentions in both cases, which is more detrimental? I think overall for the average person, alcohol is more harmful than cannabis. Partly because alcohol is physically addictive, and cannabis may be habit forming, but if there's any physical addiction, it's very mild compared with the psychosis or the pseudo-psychosis, the mimicked psychosis of a hardcore alcoholic who's like going through withdrawals and hallucinating and just freaking out. So alcohol is more addictive. Also, in my case, it makes me more stupid. Like cannabis, I mean, it's not really a higher mental state. It's not really a lower mental state, but it's just sort of like shifted sideways or something. So I don't know if it's actually consciousness expanding, but it's not really a downer either. But alcohol, I mean, it affects different people differently. But in my case, it makes me just kind of dumber and clumsier. Maybe less troubled by inhibitions and so forth, although cannabis can do that to some degree also. But just going with ancient India, monks were allowed to smoke cannabis for medicinal reasons, or at least to use cannabis for medicinal reasons, whereas alcohol, it's against the rules for them to consume alcohol, period. I mean, if it's some kind of sauce that has been cooked, where you put rum into some kind of sauce and then you cook it so that the alcohol cooks out and you still have the rum flavoring, that's allowable for a monk. But even medicine like cough syrup or something that's got some alcohol in it, that is forbidden to a monk. But monks are allowed to use cannabis, or bhanga as it's called in Pali, and they're even allowed to carry a pipe for inhaling medicinal fumes. But it would have to be for medicinal purposes. So Robert's second question here is, would you say smoking weed breaks the fifth precept? And it depends on your intentions. Like, I mean, if it has some kind of therapeutic effect and that is the reason why you're smoking it, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. Although if it's just you're partying, it's for recreational use. You're smoking it in order to wallow in sensual pleasure or euphoria, I guess. Then yeah, it would break the fifth precept, especially if it makes you stupid. If you're smoking some kind of zombie weed that just zones you out, causes you to run red lights and so forth, then yeah, that would definitely break the fifth precept. I think probably in most cases, smoking marijuana does break the fifth precept, although I don't think anyone's going to go to hell for it. So I'm just going to move on to Robert's third question. As someone trying to get back into practicing more, would you say meditation, metta, general mindfulness throughout the day, studying suttas, or sense restraint is more beneficial as an initial focus? Wow, that's a good question. I do think that it would differ for different people. Meditation is generally the way people start, but practicing meditation without getting your morals in order and so forth is not necessarily the best way of going about it. Metta, again, I'm no authority on metta, and it seems to me that metta should be spontaneous rather than artificially stimulated. General mindfulness throughout the day, that is a powerful practice. But the thing is, if you haven't done other practices, you haven't simplified your life and slowed it down, and you've got some meditation experience, then trying to be mindful of general activities throughout the day is to some degree going to be an exercise in futility. The more you do, the better. But there's a good chance that if you're just trying to start right off the bat with mindfulness of general activities, it's when you reach for the cup, you see the cup, you observe the intention to reach for the cup, you start feeling the movements of your muscles and the joints and so forth, and then you touch the cup, you're mindful of the sensation, the hardness of it, the coolness of it, and then there's the intention to grasp the cup, and then there's the motions of your hand, and then the tactile sensations of the hardness, the coolness of the cup as your fingers clench onto it. Then there's the intention to raise the cup off the table, and just the movements, the muscle movements, the joints, the oily feeling in the elbow joint as you bend your arm, just all being aware of all of this throughout the day. I think the average person would just crack up before a few hours had gone by, if they didn't just forget, which is what most people do. You just start wandering off on some train of association and just completely forget to be mindful. So, it's very powerful practice. It's one of the most powerful practices you can do, is just to be mindful of whatever is happening in the present moment. But it makes it a lot easier if you have sort of renounced the world to some degree. You've simplified your life so that there's not so much commotion going on that's going to distract you, and there's less things going on so that it's easier to keep track of all of it while you're doing it, and just be mindful of it. So sense restraint, that would include the mindfulness, but it would also include, to some degree, even morality and a certain renunciation, just simplifying and slowing things down. So that might be a good way to start, sense restraint, and then get into some kind of elementary meditation, and then gradually, certainly studying suttas might be right off the bat. That might be first, just to get yourself some familiarity with what it is you're trying to do. You read the instructions before you start putting the thing together. So yeah, studying some Dhamma, studying suttas, and some basic sense restraint, which would include morality and just slowing and simplifying things, and then getting a little meditation. It's not necessarily something that you should do one of these at a time. You get sort of a regimen of different things going. So you might have a little bit of Dhamma study, and then you meditate. And then throughout the day, you're just trying to have some sense restraint and a certain amount of mindfulness, which hopefully will improve, that sort of thing. And if you're a heart-oriented person, you can be metta too, I guess. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Rui. And Rui said, what's the translation of the Diamond Cutter Sutra that you use or have read? Well, what are you doing? Yeah. What's the matter? I think the dog is scared or something because she just like jumped into my lap. Look at this. Yeah. You're going to have to go back down though. Yeah. You're going to have to go back down. Poor Tater. You guys play nice. Okay. So the translation. Stop it. Stop it. They're not stopping it. What's the translation of the Diamond Cutter Sutra that you use or have read? Well, I've read more than one translation. I think the first translation that I read that really made the most impact on me was the Shambhala version. And I don't recall who the translator was, but the Shambhala version was 2 sutras combined into one volume. It was the Diamond Cutter Sutra, and then it was the Platform Sutra of Huineng, or just the Sutra of Huineng. And whether this Shambhala edition is still in print, I don't know. Probably you could get like a collector's edition off like eBay or something, even if it's out of print. You can still get these things. But that was a good book. That was one of the most important books I read as a young man, was the Shambhala combined Diamond Cutter Sutra and Sutra of Huineng in one book. I do have a Diamond Cutter Sutra behind me, and I think it's Edward Kanze's translation. I just found it in a library in Burma, and then just wrote it out into a notebook without the unnecessary footnotes and so forth. But Edward Kanze, he may have even done the Shambhala edition, but his translation is not the best. Like, most sutras or suttas start off with, thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Jada Grove or whatever. And Edward Kanze, he messed up right off the bat, where he translated as, thus have I heard at one time. But the at one time is applying to what comes after thus have I heard. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying at, the Jada Grove or whatever. So I think I might have fixed that in my version. I think I did modify Kanze's version just to satisfy myself with regard to certain things. But yeah, I can't say that I ever came across the best possible translation of the Diamond Cutter Sutra. I think there's another version of it in the Buddhist Bible. There's this old book called the Buddhist Bible that has all kinds of suttas and sutras, some very loose translations in there that might also contain the Diamond Cutter. If they don't, it should, because any Buddhist Bible that contains Mahayana texts should have the Diamond Cutter in it, the Vajracharika. So yeah, I've read more than one translation, I'm pretty sure, including Edward Kanze's translation. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Drunk Druck. And this is an easy question to answer. Drunk Druck asks, do you have any favorite left-wing activist monks in the West? Do I have any favorite left-wing activist monks? No, I don't. I don't have any favorite left-wing activist monks. I can't think of very many. Monks in general tend to be a bit more conservative than lay people in the West. Partly because, they're actually following an ancient tradition, so they are traditionalists. They are conservative in that regard. Yeah, I don't even think I have any favorite left-wing activist lay people in the West. There's a few that are fun to make fun of. That's about it. So, I think I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Yuga-U. And Yuga-U says, do you think there is a big collective mind of human race that mimics the one of a single person? Example being, when we, as a race, will you stop it? What's the matter with you? What's the matter? Yeah. I think part of the problem is that both of them are in heat. So just stop it, you guys. No, you don't get to jump in my lap. I'm busy. Come on. Okay, back to Yuga U's question here. Do you think there is a big collective mind of human race that mimics the one of a single person? Example being, when we as a race have a choice to do the right thing, we just do the wrong collectively, and vice versa, like there is a huge ego in play. I assume at some level there is a big collective mind of the human race. At an even bigger level, there's just the big collective mind, period. All sentient beings, at the fundamental level, it's all interconnected. To what extent there really is like a boundary around the human. I mean, there's so many semi-human kind of minds out there, like really crazy people and just really stupid people and just, people that are just like very like challenged and dysfunctional and so forth, that there's going to be like a blurry boundary on the outskirts of this collective mind of the human race. So I'm not exactly sure to what extent that there would actually be a kind of super being. I think what's more likely is you've got sort of the collective mind of a culture where everyone is sort of tuned into the same set of values and so forth. So there's this similarity, and it creates sort of a kind of group karma. That from the point of view of Theravada Buddhism, there is no group karma. Just like from the point of view of evolutionary biology, there is no group evolution that occurs at the individual level. But still, when everybody has the same kind of attitudes, the same sort of values, the same beliefs and so forth, that there's a lot of parallel karma that makes it seem as though there's group karma. And that's setting aside the whole real, like, coalescing group mind at a fundamental level. So I think I'm confusing myself to some degree here, probably confusing you as well, if you're actually listening and not just, playing on your phone or something. So, yeah, I do think that the cultural collective mind, or, like the national collective mind, would actually be more of a thing, more of a significant thing with regard to the human race than just the huge, entirely human mind. It may be that this huge, entirely human mind is sort of helping to keep the laws of physics regular and so forth, but I think it wouldn't just be limited to humans. So, yeah, I mean, at some vague level, but I do not think that it's really significant. That I do think that, like, the mind of a society, of a culture, would be more of a significant being, super being, than just the human race in general. And so I'm going to move on to Yuga-U's next question, which is, I rarely have outbursts, but when I do, I apologize and try not to repeat it. But people around have them often and are unapologetic about it, yet they stick my view into my face a lot. Example being, my great-grandma was a drunk, and my great-grandfather only was drunk once. When he complained about it, she was sticking that one time to his face every time. Why is that? Well, I mean, partly that's just female psychology. That my father, who was an authority on women, he was married 5 times. He had this saying, which is not politically correct, so trigger warning. But he used to say, you can come home from work and find your wife on the middle of the kitchen table making love to a peg-legged Negro cab driver, and within 5 minutes she's going to have it all twisted around so that it's all your fault and you're a no-good son of a bitch. So in a way, it's just sort of evolved into the female psychology to use this kind of stuff as a kind of defense mechanism, because in the distant past, and in some cultures even today, women can get slapped around by men. It's like men were bigger and stronger, and before you had like liberal policies and feminism and so forth, men could pretty much do what they wanted in their own house with their own woman. And so, or in the tribe, in the hut, whatever, the cave. And so women got really good at just sort of using mind games and just using like accusations and so forth, and just deflecting from things that they maybe did wrong by like emphasizing something that you did wrong, you know, as a kind of defense mechanism. So let's see here. So that's one thing. That's just female psychology at that level. But let's see. So, I mean, the main question here is like, let's see, what is the main question? Why is that question mark? So I guess I'm going to have to read the whole question again. I rarely have outbursts, but when I do, I apologize and try not to repeat it. But people around have them often and are unapologetic about it, yet they stick my view into my face a lot. Yeah, well, I mean, it's in a way of justifying their own position, I guess. It's like, yeah, you do it too, or you've done it before, that kind of a thing. It's a kind of defense mechanism, I guess. You know, like great grandma, the drunk great grandma. Gosh, subtle questions. This is a kind of a subtle question. Yeah. Okay. I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to Yuga-U's next question here. I want to be a good example to people around me, but I'm not perfect. I have a feeling people just remember my unwholesome actions, even if they are minuscule to wholesome ones. What to do? So this is very similar to the previous question, which I was having difficulty answering. I have a feeling people just remember my unwholesome actions. Well, it may be that if your unwholesome actions are spectacular ones and your wholesome ones are just sort of, you know, kind of dull, you know, unnoteworthy ones, then yeah, people might remember the time you chimped out more than they remember all the times that you didn't chimp out. So yeah, I mean, it's partly, I guess it's your own karma, essentially. And I assume some of it is just, you know, your interpretation of the situation, that you're just not noticing that when they are wholesomely accepting you, you know, in a positive way, and you're just singling out their unwholesome non-acceptance of you in certain cases or something. So it may be that you're also doing the same kind of thing. That you have a feeling that people just remember your unwholesome actions, which is sort of like projecting like unwholesomeness onto them. Gosh, I mean, I don't know Yuga-U well enough to know like what he's like. I mean, if I like had to work with him every day, then I would be able to psychoanalyze him here and, you know, like maybe come up with a better answer. But in this case, it's like, why do people see my bad points much easier than my good points? I can just like generalize, speculate, but I mean, I have no familiarity with the exact situation here. So maybe you're just associating with people that have like a negative, cynical kind of attitude. I don't know. So I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from Joe Doe. Joe Doe says, I think I heard somewhere that actors have or do bad karma due to acting, but what if actors have helped people feel happy and good, modern actors and play actors of antiquity? Yeah, there is a sutta where the Buddha does say that actors go to hell. That some actor was telling the Buddha that, you know, somebody told him that they're going to go to the heaven of the laughing gods or something, and the Buddha says, nah, that's not going to happen. The actors go to hell. And whether the Buddha really did say that actors go to hell or not, I mean, just because you see it in the text does not mean that the Buddha really said it. That most of the words attributed to the Buddha, you know, out there are false. I mean, the Buddha didn't really say them. I mean, sometimes you see Buddha quotes when, I mean, I know enough polytext to know the Buddha never said that. It's just some feel-good meme kind of quote that just got put into the Buddha's mouth. So, anyways, getting back to actors, I mean, what if actors have helped people feel happy and good? Well, I mean, so what? I mean, drug dealers have helped people feel happy and good. Prostitutes have helped people feel happy and good. Just because you're causing pleasure to somebody doesn't mean that it's like a wholesome kind of pleasure that they are experiencing. Personally, I don't think all actors are going to go to hell. I think actors in general, I mean, there is a reason why show business people have always, I mean, they have not had a very high status in society in certain ways. Like in ancient Rome, an actor was, what was it called? Infamia. They had this status of infamia where they were sort of a citizen, but they didn't have all the rights of citizens. I don't know if they were able to vote, like gladiators, dancing girls, like probably chariot drivers, like in the chariot races, that kind of a thing. That it was sort of a disreputable kind of job, and they tended to be not the most upright morally people. Like also in the Middle Ages, actors in a lot of countries, they could not have any kind of church service done for them. Like baptisms. Well, I guess they'd already be more than old enough to be baptized by the time they became an actor. Marriages, funerals, that kind of a thing, they were forbidden. They couldn't be buried in a churchyard. Like in Shakespeare's time, it is well known they had no actresses, that all the female roles in Shakespeare's plays were originally played by boys. And it was like common knowledge or common belief back then that an actress was not so different from a prostitute. And so nowadays it's just kind of ironic that actors are like trying to, in a way, they're set up as like paragons of, they're like role models to be emulated or something. Although that's kind of in decline now. I mean, show business people, it's like, their reputation is in decline, it seems to me. Partly because they're all just like loony lefties for the most part. Like Robert De Niro, I mean, he has not helped his reputation as a great actor by just having this horrible case of Trump derangement syndrome. Saying that Trump's going to become a dictator if he becomes president, just completely ignoring the fact that he's already been president once. Didn't do that kind of stuff. Anyways, actors, yeah, I mean, to be a good actor, in a way, it's like you have to lack a spine. You have to be able to like flow and like this sort of protean kind of a person that, I mean, you don't have like a real firm moral compass as a general rule. I'm sure there are exceptions to this. I'm sure there have been virtuous, respectable actors and actresses that they're out there, but like a professional actor, like let's say Robert De Niro, I mean, he's played like really horrible roles. I mean, he's played a lot of like murderers. I think he played like some kind of like satanic figure in one movie, at least one movie. And so it's like they're sort of leading people off into some imaginary samsaric world that, I mean, especially lately, is not going to be particularly uplifting. It's just wallowing in sensuality. So I think that's what the Buddha was really getting at, or at least the Buddha as portrayed in the sutta was getting at, in that it's just leading people astray into an even falser reality than the usual reality, plus some wallowing in sensuality included in that. Like watching entertainment shows, I mean, anyone keeping 8 precepts shouldn't be doing that. If you keep 8 precepts, you shouldn't be watching movies, for example. But some movies, they're uplifting, profound movies, but most of them are not. And the same goes for plays, I guess. So I guess I'll move on to Jodo's next question, which is, what did Buddha say about the size of the universe and the number of world systems? And I don't think the Buddha really declared the universe was any particular size or that there was any particular number of world systems, and I assume that it's infinite. I'm pretty sure that the official position of Theravada Buddhism is that the universe is infinite in size and that there are an infinite number of world systems. Different Brahmas will, like a Mahabrahma may have like overlordship of 1,000 world systems or 10,000 world systems. But I mean, it's just infinite, no beginning and no end. Samsara has no beginning and no end. So, yeah, I do not recall any sutta in which the Buddha was declaring the universe is such and such size, and there's such and such number of world systems. I don't think so. I think it's just assumed that it's infinite. And so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha says, how are predatory animals like a lion, for example, able to ascend and be reborn into a higher being if it's in their nature to commit acts of violence and eat other sentient beings? Well, it may be from a Buddhist point of view that they're not going to ascend from being a lion necessarily, that they may get a lot of bad karma from being a lion, be reborn as like a goat or something, and then gradually, eventually, they'll become a noble white royal elephant or something that has some chance of getting out of the animal realm. So that would be from a Buddhist point of view. Another possibility is that the lion may have certain positive qualities that compensate for the fact that it's killing antelopes and zebras all the time. But probably a more orthodox approach from Buddhism, from a Buddhist point of view, a Theravada Buddhist point of view, is that, it's any predator that is killing animals, and like a cat that's even like playing with the mouse before it kills it, that sort of thing, that they're probably not going to get out of that kind of existence and be reborn as a human or any kind of higher being, that they're just going to keep cycling through these different animal existences until finally they become a herbivore for a while, or some kind of peaceful, non-violent kind of animal. And then maybe from there, they have more of a chance to escape from the animal realm. But it is extremely difficult and rare, according to Theravada Buddhism, for any being to escape from the animal realm. It does happen, but it's not easy. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from PSA. And this is a long one. It's kind of an anti-natalist sort of question. And he there's like this long introduction before he gets to the question. So I better just wade into this. PSA says, there is only one sutta that seems so illogical and counterintuitive to the Dhamma that I doubt it was actually taught by the Buddha. It's the sutta where the Buddha states that even if you carried your parents on your shoulders for 100 years, you still wouldn't be able to repay your debt to them. I really would appreciate your wisdom and compassion regarding this topic, please. There are 3 important points I wish to make. 1. In order to have children, you need to have a huge amount of lust and sexual desire and act upon it without any kind of birth control method. When did this act all of a sudden become extremely meritorious? ? But this isn't one of the questions. This is rhetorical, I guess. Sex was never praised by the Buddha. Monks are not even allowed to masturbate. 2. This sutta puts a huge amount of responsibility on the children and makes the parents seem like the ones who need to be raised, educated, and protected. According to Paticcasamuppada, parents are the ones reacting to tanha and upadana, which leads to bhava, and therefore bringing more suffering to the world. If anything, parents should apologize to their children for bringing them into this world. 3. This teaching gives me a free pass to travel around the world having unprotected sex with hundreds of women and impregnating them all and abandoning them all, and then I can send a letter to my hundreds of children saying, Even if you carry me on your shoulders for 100 years, you still cannot repay the debt you have with me for the extremely meritorious act of banging your mother. So this sutta seems more like a form of controlling people added by the elders of the community at the time. And here are my questions for you. So his first question, aside from the rhetorical one, do you think this sutta was actually taught by the Buddha? Please kindly explain why. I think it's like a toss-up. He may have said it, and maybe he didn't. So let's say, for the sake of argument, the Buddha did say that we owe a profound debt to our parents. Partly, that is based on ancient Indian tradition, where reverence for your parents, I mean, it's in the Ten Commandments too, honor thy mother and father, that it was just built in to pre-modern traditions that you honor your parents. And even if they're bad parents, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, obviously, like honoring and serving even bad parents is better than just treating them like shit. I mean, it is true that they produced you. I mean, it's according to your own karma. So, I mean, you don't have a whole hell of a lot to complain about. In a sense, you chose your own parents through just the working of karma or karma. So, I mean, I suppose I should, before even answering these questions systematically, I suppose I should back up a little bit, getting to some of the things he says in this preamble, this essay. Let's see, first of all, it's strange that there's only one sutta that seems so illogical that he doubts that the Buddha really said it. I mean, there's so much in the Pali text, way more bizarre than saying that you should honor your parents, even if they're bad parents. So, I mean, like the Buddha, like when he is born, he just takes off walking with lotus flowers blossoming under his feet so his feet don't touch the ground. And then he starts talking, saying how great he is. This is his last life. And then he just reverts back to being a normal baby after that. I mean, how can that be more logical and intuitive than the Buddha saying that, I mean, you should honor your parents? So that's one part. Let's see. In order to have children, you need to have a huge amount of lust and sexual desire and act upon it without any kind of birth. Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, at least one parent, presumably the father, may have had a huge amount of lust and sexual desire, but it is just common human behavior. And it's not only common human behavior, but it's just natural, necessary behavior, especially in pre-modern times. That's just what people did. It was your duty to do it. That's just what people did. And it's not that you're honoring your parents simply because they were horny at one time. I mean, that's not what this is all about at all. Nowhere does the Buddha say that you should honor your parents because they were horny. No, it's for other reasons. It's for bringing you into this world and like in a situation where you can hear Dharma, at the very least. So, when did this act all of a sudden become extremely meritorious? It didn't, but that's not the point. I mean, you don't honor your parents because they were horny and had sex and then wound up with you. That's not why. I mean, you honor them mainly because they are your parents and that's just what you're supposed to do. And also, you honor them because they created you in a sense. They may not have done a very good job. They may be bad parents or some such. But still, I mean, you're here because of them. And so, I mean, especially if you're practicing Dharma, you're attending to what the Buddha said, it's because of them that you're able to. And it's just, I mean, again, it's just tradition throughout the world in pre-modern societies, most modern societies, that, I mean, you revere or at least you serve and honor your parents. I mean, in Burma, you serve and honor your seiya also, which is like sensei in Japan. It's like your teacher. That if somebody teaches you something, It could just be like how to fix cars. In Burma, he is your saya, and you're going to take his side. You're going to defend him. You're going to serve him. You're going to help him if you can. They have such a great veneration for teachers in Burma that teachers will have students from decades past just coming and like literally bowing to them and offering them presents and so forth. And this is a similar kind of a deal. So let's see. 2, this sutta puts a huge amount of responsibility on the children and makes the parents seem like the ones who need to be raised, educated, and protected. Well, I mean, it goes both ways. I mean, the responsibilities go both ways. It's not just that children have responsibilities to their parents. The parents have responsibilities to their children also, even if they are not very good at living up to those responsibilities. So let's see. This teaching gives me a free pass to travel around the world having unprotected sex with hundreds. No, it doesn't. I mean, especially there's other teachings saying that promiscuous sex, I mean, that's sensual misconduct. Kamesu michachara. So let's see here. Okay. So getting back to his 3 questions again. Do you think this sutta was actually taught by the Buddha? Please kindly explain why. There's no way to know for sure. No way to be absolutely certain whether the Buddha really said this, whether you said the thing about actors going to hell, whatever. I mean, it just says that in the text. The texts are not necessarily 100% reliable, but I mean, it's something that somebody in ancient times may have said. I mean, the Buddha may have said it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. So let's see. The second question. Oh, there's only 2 questions. The second question is, if you answered yes, how does this logic align with the Dhamma? It seems completely contradictory to me, but I'm open to a different opinion. For anyone hearing this, my question is not meant to be an assertion of my beliefs. I'm honestly looking for the right view regarding this matter. With regard to anybody, you're better off having benevolent feelings and being nice to them than having malevolent feelings and being mean to them. And with your parents, because it's just built into the human species, built into the primate order, that, I mean, parents are, they're the life givers. And I mean, you just serve, you obey your parents. I mean, there's also a rule that a monk is not supposed to be ordained without his parents' consent. I mean, it's just pre-modern culture is largely responsible for this sort of stuff, and just human nature in general is partly responsible for it also. But it's just the tradition. You revere your ancestors, and your parents are your immediate ancestor. And I mean, it's just cultural, partly. And they're family. So that gets a little bit of like evolutionary biology and stuff thrown in at that level when you consider them to be family. You've got their DNA. But I mean, as I have to admit, I really don't have a lot of family sentiment. That my family was not a close family. So, I mean, unlike most people, I think I have stronger feelings for the people I have chosen to be with rather than the people I was just born with. It's like it's more significant to me that I choose to be with somebody, a friend or a wife, than just like a brother or even my mother. My mother and I really did not see eye to eye. I think I outgrew my mother like around the age of 13. That just spiritually, she just was like a toddler. She just didn't get it. She didn't have a spiritual or religious bone in her body. She was just a very like samsara-centric person. But still, I mean, she did try to be a good mother. She didn't always succeed. She was not a particularly wise person, but still, I mean, that was one thing that I used to feel disappointment in, that I was a monk. I wasn't able to take care of my mother when she got old. She certainly could have used the help. And here I am living in a cave in Burma, I was in Burma when she died. But I'm not sure that I'm even answering the question anymore. Let's see here. Yeah, I mean, it just makes sense that it's better for you to be benevolent towards your parents than malevolent or even indifferent towards your parents. Even if they're bad parents, I mean, you can still forgive them. That's virtuous. You can still serve them, which is virtuous. So, yeah, I think it may be that, let's see, PSA just has sort of parent issues. Maybe his parents were not the best parents. But I think he's looking at things from a very modern or even postmodern point of view, where like the family is just being deconstructed, essentially. But family sentiment is very strong up until modern times. I mean, there have been times of like societal decline, like Rome or something, where, you know, family values and like respect for one's family and so forth has fallen by the wayside to some degree. But it's generally not a healthy state for society. So I'm just moving on to the next question here. This is from Philalethes. And I don't think Philalethes has asked questions before. So Philalethes says, well, I wanted to ask if it's possible for you to do a comprehensive comparison of all the sects of Buddhism. And I'm curious why you reject Mahayana. I don't think you have any videos on that, so I'd love to see one. Also, talk about Zen, please, and your opinions on it, since that's the version of Buddhism that interests me the most. I understand all your points about Buddhism in comparison to other religions, but why not Mahayana? Well, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be doing a comprehensive comparison of all the sects of Buddhism here in this Q&A, especially since we've already been going for well over 2 hours. But let's see. He's curious why I reject Mahayana. Well, I mean, I like certain schools of Mahayana. I like Zen. I've got Zen books on the bookcase back there. I like Zen koans, for example. I have a lot of respect for Nagarjuna, who was not Theravada Buddhist. So, I mean, when he says I reject Mahayana, what I'm essentially doing is acknowledging that most of what is taught by Mahayana Buddhism was not taught by the Buddha. When I became a Buddhist, I wanted to follow what the Buddha taught. That's why I'm a Buddhist. I mean, I don't want to follow some tradition that was cooked up centuries later. I wanted to follow what the enlightened founder of the tradition taught as well as I was able. So I started doing like investigations, like detective work. What did the Buddha really teach? I learned very quickly that not everything in the Pali text is likely to be authentic teachings of the Buddha. And so mainly I reject Mahayana to the extent that I just acknowledge that even though a lot of it is very profound, very useful, that I assume there have been enlightened Mahayana Buddhists, even though Mahayana supposedly, postpones enlightenment indefinitely for the sake of liberating all beings, which don't really exist, and there's an infinite number of them, and it's never going to happen. So I reject Mahayana to the extent that Mahayana rejects what the Buddha originally taught. So, I mean, I don't reject Mahayana any more than I reject Hinduism, for example. I think there's a lot of wisdom in Hinduism, like some of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. Some Hindu swamis are extremely advanced. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there have been more enlightened Hindus than enlightened Theravada Buddhists, despite their wrong view and all that. So, I mean, really, I'm not so much rejecting Mahayanas as just acknowledging that most of the teachings of Mahayana, or at least the teachings that deviate from Theravada, most of those teachings that are not found in Theravada were not taught by the Buddha. It was just stuff that got invented later. And some of it is like going against what the Buddha taught, like postponing enlightenment indefinitely. So I guess I can back up. He wants a comprehensive, Philalethes here wants a comprehensive comparison of all the sects of Buddhism. Well, I can give like a really brief history of Buddhism. Well, so you start off with what the Buddha originally taught, and it was very like intuitive and not very structured. Probably at the beginning, I mean, there was no rules of monastic discipline, no uniform that the monks all wore that looked the same and all that. No monasteries even at first. And then Buddhism struck traction. It started getting popular after the Buddha's time. Like within 100 years, Buddhism was on fire. It was spreading, and just different places would have different, just because of isolation. I mean, they didn't have the information age back then. News would travel only as fast as a monk could walk, essentially. And so just isolation and just different teachers emphasizing different things resulted in Buddhism starting to split apart into different sects. And some of these sects just kept going and going in weird directions until they hardly resembled what the Buddha originally taught. And Mahayana was, in some like strands within Mahayana were like a reform movement, like Prajna Paramita was trying to get back at what the Buddha originally taught, because even in like Theravada Buddhism, it became so scholastic and just like philosophical, just so much like thinking, just cogitation, like Abhidhamma and so forth, just list after list after list, and just these extremely complicated attempts at explaining everything intellectually, even though they're trying to pass it off as something that the Buddha saw in like a flash of insight. But a lot of it just, it doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. So some of Mahayana was attempt to just get back to like the original spirit of Dharma. And I think that like Zen did a good job of that. Majjhimaka did a good job of that. Prajna Paramita did a good job of that. But then other schools are just like veering so far away that you've got like in Japan, like Nichiren. I think it's Nichiren, where they're essentially like turn Buddhism into worshiping the Lotus Sutra, which is like apocrypha. The Buddha probably didn't teach the Lotus Sutra, but Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo is a kind of prayer or mantra. Just, I bow to the Lotus Sutra, which again probably does not accurately represent what the Buddha taught. So, just some schools of Buddhism, and Mahayana has done this more than Theravada, just kept wandering farther and farther away from what the Buddha originally taught, while still retaining certain elements of it. Like Mahayana is just like a full spectrum from the ridiculous to the sublime. Hinduism is like that too. So, let's see. He says, I don't think you have any videos on that, so I'd love to see one. Actually, I did have a video on Mahayana Buddhism comparing Theravada and Mahayana and dealing with like the evolution of it and so on. YouTube took it down. They deleted it for the safety of the viewers, but it's still on BitChute. So you might be able to find a video that I did with Ajahn Punadamo discussing the comparison and contrast of Theravada and Mahayana. But Theravada, it's not the original Buddhism. It's already like a deviation from the original teachings. How much of a deviation is very debatable. So, let's see. Also talk about Zen, please. Well, my original idea was to become a Zen monk until I got converted to Theravada, when I realized that Theravada comes closer to what the Buddha originally taught. And again, like I started out saying, if I'm going to be a Buddhist, I want to follow what the Buddha taught, especially if I'm going to be a monk, like a professional full-time Buddhist. not just a part-time Buddhist or, sort of a casual Buddhist, but if I'm really going to dedicate my life to practicing Buddhism, I want to practice what the Buddha originally taught, what this enlightened founder of the system originally taught. And so you have to cut through the dead wood, and most of Mahayana winds up in the dead wood, except for the parts that are similar to what's found in Theravada. There are certain aspects of Zen where they may come closer to what the Buddha originally taught than Theravada does now, although you can still find it in the texts, the Pali texts. So, Zen, with regard to its sort of iconoclasm, in a sense, it's disdain for dogmatism. That comes closer to what the Buddha originally taught than Theravada as it exists today. But then adding in Pure Land elements and sort of mythological bodhisattvas and so forth, it really doesn't help. So let's see. I guess I answered that question. I guess I answered that question probably a dozen times at least in every Q&A video. But I really do. I do think that probably I sort of answered that question. And so I'm moving on to Philalithi's second question, which is, where can I make a donation to you? Well, if you look in the links, the URL links below my videos, then you can find a means of making a donation if you so desire. And generosity is virtue. It's just, I feel really kind of cringy, asking for donations, anything like that. It's very helpful, but mainly I'm here to just do what I'm doing as a kind of public service. Some people appreciate this. That's good. I'm not doing it for the purpose of, getting any physical reward out of it. But some people have been generous, and I am grateful for their generosity. Grateful to them for their generosity. So yeah, where can you make a donation is look in the URL links below the video, and you should find some link that works so that you can, there's let's see, PayPal. No, not PayPal. What is it? I don't even remember now. I think there's CashApp or something that I don't think anybody uses, but I think it's PayPal that people use sometimes. Or also I've got a Subscribe Star channel where you can subscribe to make a monthly contribution of as little as $5. So there's that also. I can't really say that you get any extra perks from being on my Subscribe Star. Some people will say, if you're on my Subscribe Star or my Patreon, they wouldn't take me on Patreon. I was too controversial, even as a monk, for Patreon to accept me as a client. But some people say, you subscribe on Patreon or whatever, and you get to see these extra videos other people don't get to see, or you get these extra advantages and so forth. And the only advantage you get for subscribing to my Subscribe Star is the virtue of generously supporting me. Plus, you can see my videos and stuff on the Subscribe Star channel, but they're on YouTube also, and BitChute, and lately on Rumble also. So I answered that one, pretty sure. So I'm moving on to the next one. This is from Twin Wasabi. And Twin Wasabi says, any thoughts on the Dharma initiative? And I guess the easy answer to that is nope, because I don't know what the Dharma initiative is. What is the Dharma initiative? Yeah, I don't know what the Dharma initiative is. So yeah, that's my main thought on the Dharma initiative is, what is the Dharma initiative? I don't know. I must have been absent on that day. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Ketchup. And I do recall Ketchup asking questions months ago, and then he was satiated, I guess, with my answers. And now he's back for more. So Ketchup says, what percentage of your viewers do you think practice mindfulness? Well, golly, it's hard to say because there isn't any like cutoff between unmindful and mindful. Everybody's got some kind of mindfulness. According to Abhidhamma philosophy anyway, every mind moment has mindfulness in it. It's like mindfulness is just one of those mental states that has to be in a human mind, just pretty much every mind moment. But practicing mindfulness, that's where you're trying to be more mindful than the average person. It's not just regular mindfulness, it's like right mindfulness. It's not just natural mindfulness, it's supernatural mindfulness or something. What percentage of my viewers do I think practice mindfulness? Well, I mean, pretty much everybody's going to be practicing at some point where you're doing something dangerous, or it's like you've got this like a bowl of water that's full to the brim, and you've got to carry it without spilling any. Then, in a way, that's a kind of mindfulness. Any tightrope walker has got to be very mindful in a sense. You do rock climbing, you got to be real mindful when you're rock climbing, because if you space off for like a fraction of a second, you may be dead. Same goes for like motorcycle racing. That's why some people are addicted to rock climbing or motorcycle racing, is it forces them to be in this mindful, expanded state of consciousness that they can't really cultivate without the rock climbing or the motorcycle racing. It just forces them to be in this expanded state of now. So I'm not exactly sure where to draw the line between practicing mindfulness and not practicing mindfulness. So, I mean, what percentage of my viewers do I think try to practice mindfulness? Maybe that would be a better question for me to answer. What percentage of my viewers do I think try to practice mindfulness? I would guess at least half. Members of my Discord server, probably more than half of them are trying to practice mindfulness sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. With regard to people that watch my videos, I have less of an idea of the full spectrum, what the bell-shaped curve would be like with regard to people that just watch the YouTube videos. But I would guess it would be into double digits anyway. A significant amount of my viewers, I would assume, try to be mindful sometimes. They make like a deliberate, conscious effort to be above the level of just average, everyday, semi-mindfulness. So I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Raphael. And Raphael says, do you think your meditation would have been more successful if you had been ordained in the Soto tradition? That's Soto Zen. I ask because you said that your meditation got much better when you became frustrated and stopped seeing enlightenment as the goal of your meditation. According to Dogen, there should be no expectations at all during Zazen. Yeah, there should be no expectations at all when doing Theravada Buddhist meditation either. I'm not sure that my meditation would have been more successful if I had been ordained as a Soto Zen monk. Partly because, as I say, it's all there in Theravada also. So, and the kind of meditation I was practicing, especially after I'd been a monk for several years, I mean, a lot of it was essentially Soto Zen meditation, like Shikantaza. So, yeah, I'm not sure that my meditation would have been more successful if I had been a Zen monk, because I wound up practicing like essentially a kind of Zen meditation anyway. And I mean, all the essential teachings are there in Theravada. And those were the ones I was kind of drawn to, like the Atthakavagga is very Zen-like. And that was like my Bible. It was like the Atthakavagga is what kept me in the monkhood for 30 years. So, yeah, I kind of doubt, I mean, it's possible, but I kind of doubt that my meditation would have been more successful if I had been ordained as a Zen monk. And I'm getting a lot of questions where it's like, I really can't say what the answer is because it's speculative. It's speculation. That question was speculation. It's like, maybe, maybe not. That's about as far as you can get with the answer. So let's see if we have better luck with Pyramid here. Pyramid's asking the next question, which is, did you end up confronting that monk you witnessed slapping that girl's booty? And he's referring to a time I was a monk in Rangoon, Burma, walking down the sidewalk. Another monk about 50 feet in front of me was walking in the same direction as me. So I was like following behind him. And I watched him swerve deliberately out of his way. I mean, obviously, he deliberately swerved out of his way so he could grab the ass of a pretty girl standing at a bus stop. And at the time, I wanted to just walk right up to him and tap him on the shoulder and then just deck him, just punch him in the face. But I didn't. So I didn't confront that monk. And if I had confronted that monk, I might have wound up in jail, or, it would have been worse than if I didn't confront that monk, because I really wanted to just beat him up. And that would have been inappropriate too. To grab a pretty girl's ass at a bus stop is inappropriate behavior. To beat up a monk on the sidewalk is also inappropriate behavior. So it's just as well that, that kind of stuff, it just goes on in Buddhist countries. You're going to have crooked, sloppy monks, just like you have crooked, sloppy ministers, crooked, sloppy priests. Wherever you go, you're never going to have just all like virtuous saints that are ordained or in the clergy or whatever. There's always going to be some people that shouldn't be there. So, yeah, I didn't really confront him. And I'll just move on to the next question. That was at least a question that I was able to answer easily. This question is from Wayne. And Wayne says, if the oldest of the suttas are the original teachings of the Buddha, and the Buddha says, don't believe anything, everything is empty, this sounds a lot like the teachings of Zen. Thoughts? Well, yeah, it's like some like scholars have said that the Atthakavagga, which is like the largest fragment of really archaic, primitive Buddhism still in existence, as far as I know. It's like pre-Theravada Buddhism. It's very old. That it has been called by some scholars as proto-Madhyamaka, and they just freely admit that, it does resemble Zen in a lot of respects. And that's sort of getting back to what I was saying earlier about how some Mahayana schools really did try to get back to the original spirit. And so Zen did that to some degree. Also, Prajnaparamita did that to some degree. Madhyamaka did that to some degree. Some other schools, not so much. So, yeah, it was like Zen was like a reform movement, or at least some aspects of Zen were a kind of reform trying to get back to the original spirit and get away from all of this like scholastic dogmatism, which was taking over the earlier schools of Buddhism as they continued to develop, change over time, and just more and more like scholar monks just coming up with more and more philosophies and so forth. It really was just getting cluttered and just obscuring the original spirit, which is don't believe anything, no beliefs, no perceptions, no view. So, yeah, I think that really early Buddhism, it does resemble Zen in certain ways. The Bodhisattva concept is nowhere to be seen, but just that idea of, just view the world as empty and, don't cling to any of it. That kind of thing. There are like a stronger tradition of that in some Mahayana schools than in Theravada now. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. And this is from Wolfenhaus, who asked the question just probably less than an hour before I started recording this. And Wolfenhaus says, would you ultimately recommend Buddhism as a spiritual path to any ethnic European? I have been practicing asatru for a while now and enjoy it, but Buddhism does seem alluring in a deepening of practice sort of way. And I don't know what asatru is. I'm sorry. It's seems like some kind of spiritual tradition, but I do not know what asatru is. It looks like maybe kind of Hinduism. I'm not sure. But getting to the question here, would you ultimately recommend Buddhism as a spiritual path to any ethnic European? Well, I mean, it wouldn't be very realistic to recommend it to any ethnic European. I mean, most ethnic Europeans don't even care about a spiritual path. It'd be just sort of religion. And religion and genuine spirituality are two different things. There's overlap, but religion is superficial as a general rule, whereas true spirituality is, you're really trying to transcend the ordinary human condition, not just trying to, obey commandments in a book so that you go to heaven, like a Jehovah's Witness or something. Or just, Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not even trying to get into heaven as a general rule. So, the people that aren't spiritual, what's the point of recommending a spiritual path to somebody who is going to reject it? Because they're just not spiritual. They just don't care. And, most religious people that aren't spiritual, that are of European ancestry, they're going to be Christians. That's just the traditional, that's the main religion traditionally in European cultures, since Roman times. So, and then some people, even if they do have a spiritual inclination, they're already firmly established in Christianity, that Christianity satisfies them. They have no problem worshiping a deified Jewish person. So, if it works for them, that's fine. It's like Buddhism, it's really a very head-oriented approach. It's a philosophical, head-oriented approach. Or if you get into the really advanced stuff, then it's just like radical mysticism. And not everybody is very head-oriented or a radical mystic. So people that are more like devotionalistic, they might want something more devotionalistic than Theravada anyway. Like Hinduism has more devotionalism. Christianity also has more devotionalism. They want a savior, something like that. They want a guru. Then it may be that they might find something more to their liking, something that's more satisfying to them in some other religion. And I don't like the idea of a religious monopoly. That I do think a culture, a society would be healthier with different religious systems competing, because when you have a monopoly, then the quality goes down. It's just the way it is, because nobody's going to choose something else, because there is no something else to choose. They got to take what they can get. But if you've got, like in ancient India, this one reason why Indian spirituality was so strong and continues to be so strong in certain respects is you had these different sects that were competing with each other and like debating with each other and just had to be on their toes. They had to be better than the other religion. Otherwise, people were going to follow the other religion. So I'm really don't like the idea of like a Buddhist monoculture. Burma, it's in some ways they're better off than us. In some ways they are more civilized than we are. But they have kind of a medieval, like dogmatic kind of approach to religion as a general rule. So I don't think that works very well for modern Westerners. When you're just told something and you have to believe it just because you're told that. It says it in the Holy Scripture, therefore it is true. And if you don't like that, you have a wrong view, you're a heretic. It just doesn't work very well. So, I am fully in support of Buddhism having representation in the West, that it should be an option for anyone who finds it valuable. But I don't know if I would recommend Buddhism as like the religion for any ethnic European. Like Evola talked a lot about bringing Buddhism into the West for the elites to follow, like the spiritual elites. And he didn't really give a shit what the common people were following. And I mean, I guess there's a certain amount of sense in that. I mean, the West might be better off as a Buddhist West than as a Christian West. Certainly it'd be way better off as a Buddhist West than a Marxist West. But I do think that there should be a variety of different spiritual paths, different traditions, and different people. Just one size does not fit all. Different people have different inclinations. And so maybe for like an intellectual, head-oriented person that also has like a mystical streak, Theravada Buddhism or Buddhism in general might just be excellent. But somebody else, I mean, other people, I mean, what's happening in the West, some people are adopting Buddhism without really accepting it. And then they're just trying to change it into like this sort of feminized neo-Marxist kind of gobbledygook. Like they're trying to change Christianity and Hinduism and any other system that they can get their hands on. So, I mean, one advantage of not having everybody be a Buddhist is that, you know, the stupidest, most foolish, rascally, bad people, you know, they wouldn't have to be Buddhist. If everyone's Buddhist, then, you know, it's like the best and the worst are all going to be Buddhists, and the worst are going to be like really bad Buddhists. So you're probably better off just letting them follow some other religion, or more likely no religion at all. But yeah, Buddhism is a good path. I mean, it works well for educated Western people who think too much. It makes more sense than the average religion. You know, it makes more sense than Christianity, for example. But Christianity works for some people. And maybe that some people have even become fully enlightened Christians. I mean, I give St. John of the Cross as a possible example of a fully enlightened Christian, but he's not the only possible example. So, would I ultimately recommend Buddhism as a spiritual path to any ethnic European? Probably not. Partly because it would be just futile in a lot of cases, in most cases. That, I mean, so what if I recommend Buddhism to them? They're still not going to care. I mean, either because they're just not religious or spiritual, or they've already, you know, they're already firmly established in Christianity or some such. So maybe I'm just taking this too literally and autistically. But I mean, if the West had to convert to some pre-existent world spiritual tradition, or just some pre-existent spiritual tradition, I think like Buddhism would probably be the best. Some form of Buddhism. So I guess I answered all the questions. I hope. I kind of did. I at least answered some of the questions. And so I guess we've reached the end where I say, if you got any questions, got any more questions, then feel free to ask in the comments below. And check out the URL links, and like and subscribe if you haven't already, and be happy.